The letter lay on my desk on a Tuesday morning, the paper crisp, white, the typed words stark and cold. Your contributions are no longer required. It stated, just like that. 15 years of my life, my passion poured into the Vance Culinary Institute, dissolved in a single sentence. I'm Breonna Sterling. I wasn't just a lecturer there. I felt like I helped craft its very soul, every curriculum, every signature course. I'd always believed that dedication, true craftsmanship, would be its own shield, but I learned, didn't I, that some people only see what they can take. And they've forgotten a crucial ingredient in their little recipe for my dismissal. Something my grandfather had taught me a very, very long time ago. It was Julian Vance himself, the CEO, who delivered the news, though delivered is too generous a word. He summoned me to his office, a space usually filled with the aroma of ambition and expensive coffee. Today, it just smelled sterile. He didn't look me in the eye, not really. His voice, usually so resonant when charming donors or addressing students, was smooth, almost oiled, as he spoke of restructuring and new strategic directions. My role, head of program development and senior lecturer, the one I built from the ground up over a decade and a half, was being streamlined. Such an anodyne word for gutting a significant part of someone's life. And then, framed in the doorway, as if on cue, stood Olivia Hayes. She couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in something sharp and undoubtedly expensive, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. Beside her, a little more in shadow, but no less present, was Eleanor Vance, Julian's wife, a woman whose influence in the city's philanthropic circles was as well known as her taste for control. Olivia, they announced, would be stepping into a newly created, dynamic role focusing on innovation. It took me a moment, a beat of stand silence, to realize they meant my role. My entire department. Essentially, the shock wasn't a loud explosion. It was more like the air being slowly pressed from my lungs. A quiet, internal implosion. 15 years. 15 years of early mornings, late nights grading papers, mentoring students who'd gone on to win awards, of developing courses that had become the backbone of VCI's reputation. Courses on the history of regional American cuisine, advanced patisserie techniques I'd spent years perfecting, the sustainable sourcing program I fought tooth and nail to implement. All of it, streamlined. I remember nodding, a purely mechanical gesture. My mind was still trying to catch up with the words, trying to process the casual cruelty of it. Olivia's smirk widened just a fraction. She looked like a cat who'd not only gotten the cream, but had also managed to frame the family dog for it. Eleanor gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a queen dismissing a courtier. I walked out of Julian's office, and then out of the familiar, hallowed halls of the Vance Culinary Institute, the scent of baking bread and roasting herbs, usually a comfort, now feeling like a taunt. The weight of it didn't fully hit me until I was in my car, the engine off, just sitting in the parking lot. It felt as if a part of me, a vital organ, had been surgically removed without anesthesia. The years I'd invested, the students I poured my heart into, the very identity I'd woven for myself within those walls. It all felt like it had been casually erased, like chalk on a blackboard. The unfairness of it was a bitter taste, metallic and sharp, lingering on my tongue. I thought of the students who relied on my guidance, the colleagues I respected, the legacy I believed I was building. It wasn't just a job, it was a vocation, a craft, and it had been taken, not because of incompetence, not because of any failing on my part, but seemingly on a whim, to make space for someone younger, someone connected. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined, a professional wound that felt intensely personal. The injustice of it settled in my stomach, a cold, hard stone. The drive home was a blur. The city streets, usually so familiar, seemed alien. My mind kept replaying Julian's smooth, impersonal voice, Olivia's triumphant little smile, Eleanor's cool dismissal. It was on that drive, with the gray cityscape sliding past, that my grandfather, Arthur, came to mind. He'd been gone for many years, but his voice, raspy and kind, was suddenly as clear as if he were sitting beside me. Arthur wasn't a chef by trade, though he cooked with a quiet, methodical passion that had first ignited my own love for food. He was a businessman, a man who'd seen booms and busts, a man who understood the ephemeral nature of trends and the enduring value of substance. He used to tell me, Brianna, people will always build flashy things up high, towers of glass and steel, reputations built on air, but the real power, the real lasting strength, is in owning the ground they stand on. Don't ever forget that. When I was younger, I thought it was just one of his quaint, old-fashioned sayings, but his words had a way of settling deep. When he passed, he left me a modest inheritance. I was in my early 20s, just out of culinary school myself, full of dreams about opening a little bistro. Most of my peers were planning stages in Michelin-star kitchens in Europe or looking for angel investors for trendy food trucks. But Arthur's words echoed. So instead of pouring all of it into a fleeting culinary venture, I did something unexpected. I enrolled in night classes for business law. I learned about contracts, about property management, about the intricate dance of real estate investment. It wasn't glamorous. My friends thought I was a little strange. Commercial leases? Brianna, seriously, one had said, wrinkling her nose, but I was driven by Arthur's quiet wisdom. With his inheritance and a carefully managed loan, I established Arthur Properties LLC. In his memory, it was a small, discreet operation. Over the next few years, Arthur Properties quietly acquired a few undervalued commercial buildings in historic parts of the city. One of them was a beautiful, slightly dilapidated Art Deco building on Chestnut Street, a grand old dame that had seen better days. I oversaw its meticulous renovation, preserving its historic character while updating its infrastructure. It took nearly 2 years. And then, one sunny afternoon, Julian Vance, a rising star in the culinary education world, full of expansive charm and ambition, walked into the newly renovated lobby of 700 Chestnut Street. He was looking for a prestigious headquarters for his fledgling Vance Culinary Institute. He was. He declared, immensely impressed by the building, its location, its blend of historic grandeur and modern functionality. He probably saw me, the young woman representing Arthur Properties, as just an eager, slightly green property manager, thrilled to land such a promising tenant. I remember the weight of the pen as he signed the long-term lease. He had no idea he was signing a contract with the granddaughter of Arthur Sterling, a quiet culinary instructor who not only aced her advanced contract law class, but had also, with the guidance of Arthur's old, razor-sharp attorney, Mr. David Chen, personally helped draft certain, very specific clauses within that very lease, a little secret ingredient, as Arthur might have called it, tucked away in the dense legal prose. A contingency for a day I hoped would never come, but one Arthur's pragmatic foresight had taught me to prepare for, and as the bitterness of Julian's betrayal settled in my gut, a different kind of resolve began to simmer. Looking back, the signs had been there for months, like subtle off notes in a once perfect dish. I'd just been too focused on my work, too invested in my belief in VCI's mission, to see them clearly for what they were, or perhaps I'd simply chosen not to. Olivia Hayes' arrival hadn't been quiet. Eleanor Vance had paraded her through the institute like a prize filly, her voice, a little too loud, gushing at every faculty meeting and donor event about Olivia's fresh perspective and innate talent. Fresh perspective, it turned out, meant a casual disregard for established protocols, an almost pathological need to attach her name to other people's ideas, and a remarkable ability to be perpetually busy without actually producing anything of substance. Her initial role was vaguely defined, something like Special Projects Coordinator, which seemed to involve a lot of long lunches with Eleanor and her social circle. and very little actual project coordination. I first encountered her fresh perspective when she'd been assigned to assist me with the curriculum review for the upcoming academic year. She missed every deadline, submitted a proposal that was largely plagiarized from a well-known culinary journal, a fact a first-year student would have spotted, and then, when I gently pointed out the issues, she burst into tears in Julian's office, implying I was unsupportive and threatened by new ideas. Julian, to his credit, had looked uncomfortable then, but Eleanor's influence was a powerful current. He'd smoothed things over, talking about mentoring and different working styles. Translation: Eleanor wants this, so we all have to play along. The whispers started soon after. My colleagues, many of whom I had worked alongside for years, began to grow frustrated. Olivia would swan into teaching kitchens, offering unsolicited, often incorrect, advice to students during practical exams. She'd take credit for successful alumni events organized by others. She'd disrupt established workflows in the name of shaking things up, leaving a trail of confusion and resentment. I tried to address it professionally, of course. I scheduled meetings with Julian. I presented data, not opinions, but actual data on project delays in areas Olivia graced with her presence, on dipping student satisfaction scores in workshops she contributed to, on the rising tide of faculty complaints that were being quietly shelved by HR, likely at Eleanor's behest. Julian would listen with that polite, detached air of his gaze fixed somewhere over my left shoulder. He'd nod, make vague promises about looking into it, and then talk about the importance of fostering diverse viewpoints and embracing change. It was like talking to a beautifully polished brick wall. The message was clear. Olivia was untouchable. Then the more insidious campaign began. Rumors about me, that I was resistant to innovation, that I was difficult to collaborate with, that I was stuck in the past. These weren't loud accusations, just quiet, persistent drips of poison in the VCI well. I'd catch colleagues looking at me strangely. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. The warmth I'd once felt in those hallways began to chill. The worst was a particularly nasty rumor, which I later found out Olivia herself had gleefully spread, insinuating I'd been overly familiar with a prominent chef to secure his participation in our guest lecture series. It was baseless, of course, but mud sticks. It was all design, I realized later, to build a narrative, a justification for what was to come. They weren't just ousting me, they were trying to discredit me, to make it seem like my departure was not only necessary, but also a relief to the institution. The cracks in the hearth, once small, were now gaping fissures, and the warmth of the VCI I loved was rapidly bleeding out. The business of it wasn't just about losing a job. It was about the deliberate, calculated erosion of my professional integrity, orchestrated by people I had, perhaps naively, once considered part of my professional family. The days immediately following my dismissal were a strange mix of numbness and a slowly sharpening ache. The shock wore off, not into rage, not yet, but into a cold, clear space. It was in that clarity that the planning began. It wasn't about revenge, not in the fiery, destructive sense. It was about equilibrium, about restoring a balance that had been so cruelly overturned. My first thought wasn't a job board or a headhunter. It was my own meticulously organized files for Arthur Properties LLC, tucked away in the VCI lease agreement. A document Julian Vance had likely only skimmed before signing was Section 9. Subclause B, integrity and governance standards. I drafted it myself, years ago, with Mr. Chin's expert guidance. It was, as he called it, a sleeping giant. It stipulated that if the lessee, in this case, the Vance Culinary Institute, engaged in or demonstrably tolerated unethical corporate governance, including but not limited to wrongful dismissal motivated by nepotism or the deliberate defamation of an employee by senior management or their proxies, which could bring the reputation of the property itself into disrepute, the lessor Arthur Properties reserved the right to terminate the lease agreement with immediate effect, following a 24-hour notice period. It was an unusual clause, Mr. Chen had admitted at the time. Aggressive, "Brianna, you're sure about this?" he'd asked, one eyebrow raised. "Only for true justice, Mr. Chen, I promise." And looking back at Olivia's smug face, at Julian's casual dismissal, at the calculated campaign to undermine me, I knew that time had come. Gathering the bitter herbs, as I started to think of the evidence, wasn't as difficult as I feared. The signs, once I allowed myself to see them, were everywhere. I started a new file on my laptop, VCI breach of contract evidence. There were the internal memos from Julian, CC'd to me by a sympathetic junior administrator, praising Olivia's strategic insights on projects she'd barely touched. Printouts of emails, forwarded anonymously by a long-suffering HR employee, from Eleanor Vance to HR, instructing them to manage any formal complaints regarding Olivia's conduct, manage clearly meaning Barry. Then there were the student evaluations for my courses, consistently high marks for engagement, clarity, and expertise. For the few workshops Olivia had led, or rather disrupted, a litany of confused and frustrated comments, many of which, I discovered, had never made it into the official semester reviews presented to the academic board. I found copies of the originals, saved by a department secretary who'd always had a keen sense of fairness and an excellent filing system. I documented the timeline of Olivia's promotions, each one happening shortly after I raised concerns about her performance or conduct. I cross-referenced dates, times, individuals involved. I even managed to get a sworn affidavit from a former colleague, now at another institution, who had witnessed Olivia Obley taking credit for a curriculum module I had developed. Each piece of evidence was a small, sharp stone, painful to hold, but necessary. The binder grew thicker, my resolve solidified. This wasn't just about losing a job anymore, this was about dignity. It was about the integrity of the work I'd done, the work VCI was supposed to stand for. It was about Arthur's legacy of doing things the right way, and it was about that promise to Mr. Chen. The dull ache of betrayal was morphing into something else, something steely and focused. They hadn't just fired me, they'd underestimated me. And they'd broken the terms of our agreement. With the binder of evidence feeling solid and heavy in my briefcase, I went to see Mr. David Chen. His office was in one of those older, distinguished buildings downtown, filled with the scent of old books and quiet competence. He listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, fact by methodical fact, presenting the evidence I'd gathered. His expression remained neutral, but I saw a familiar sharpening in his eyes, the look he got when a complex legal puzzle was laid before him. When I finished, there was a long pause. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. "Brianna," he said finally, his voice grave, but with an undercurrent of something I could only describe as grim satisfaction. "The evidence is compelling and heartbreaking, given your history with the Institute." He picked up the copy of the VCI lease I brought, his gaze going straight to Section 9, Subclause B. "Arthur was a wise man. This clause, it's airtight. You are well within your rights to enact it." He looked up at me, that sleeping giant. "It's time to wake him." A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. It wasn't just me. Then it wasn't just my wounded pride. It was a clear, actionable breach. The night before D-Day, as I started calling it in my head, was strangely calm. The frantic energy of the past few weeks had settled into a focused stillness. I sat at my grandfather's old mahogany desk, the one Arthur Properties now used as its modest command center. There were 3 key documents to prepare. First, the official notice of lease termination from Arthur Properties LLC to the Board of Directors of the Vance Culinary Institute. It was concise, citing Section 9, Subclause B, and detailing the specific breaches, wrongful dismissal demonstrably motivated by nepotism, and a pattern of unethical governance aimed at defaming an employee and suppressing legitimate concerns, thereby damaging the goodwill and reputation associated with the property at 700 Chestnut Street. It stipulated that all VCI operations within the premises must cease within 24 hours of receipt. Mr. Chen would ensure it was delivered electronically and by courier at precisely 9 a.m. The next morning, second, an email to all VCI staff and faculty. This one required a delicate touch. I couldn't reveal my hand too early. Using an encrypted, untraceable email service, I drafted a message that would appear to be an urgent internal communication. Subject, urgent, temporary facility closure minus 700 Chestnut Street. The body explained that due to unforeseen critical structural maintenance issues requiring immediate attention, the building would be inaccessible from 9 a.m. the following day until further notice. All staff and faculty were instructed to work remotely. Their direct managers would be in touch. It was plausible enough to cause confusion and disruption, but not outright panic until the official notice hit. This was scheduled to send at 8:55 a.m. Third, a press release from Arthur Properties LLC. This was for later, to be released at precisely 9:30 a.m. once the doors were metaphorically and literally sealed. Headline: Arthur Properties terminates lease with the Vance Culinary Institute citing serious breaches of ethical governance. The body would briefly outline the reasons, referencing the lease clause, and state that building access had been suspended. It would name Mr. David Chen as the legal contact. No messy details, just the cold, hard facts, enough to make the point. Not enough to invite a protracted public squabble over individual grievances, though I knew the media would dig. I reread each document. Each word felt deliberate. Wait. There was no triumph. Not yet. Just a heavy sense of inevitability, like setting a complex piece of machinery in motion, knowing that once started, it could not be easily stopped. Arthur's photo, a small, framed black and white image of him with a kind, knowing smile, sat on the corner of the desk. The ground they stand on, Briona, I could almost hear him say tonight. The ground under the Vance Culinary Institute was about to shift. The next morning, I was parked across the street from 700 Chestnut Street by 8:30. The air was crisp, the sky clear. Early autumn blue. I had a travel mug of strong black coffee, my laptop open on the passenger seat, connected to a mobile hotspot. I wasn't there out of malice, not exactly. It was more a need to witness, to see the gears I'd set in motion actually turn. At 8:55 a.m., I hit send on the email to VCA staff, a small, almost anticlimactic click. The first few staff members began to arrive around 8:45, mostly junior administrative staff, a couple of early bird instructors. I watched as they approached the main entrance, fumbling for their badges. The heavy oak doors, usually propped open by this time, remained firmly shut. A uniformed security guard, one of Arthur Properties' trusted contractors, not VCI's usual detail, stood politely but impassively by the entrance. I saw the first flicker of confusion, then annoyance. A young woman in a bright scarf swiped her badge. Nothing. She tried again, more forcefully, still nothing. She looked around, bewildered, then pulled out her phone. A small knot of people began to form, murmurs too faint for me to hear, but their body language spoke volumes, hunched shoulders, frustrated gestures, anxious glances at their watches. At precisely 9 a.m., my phone buzzed, a notification from Mr. Chen's office. Notice of lease termination successfully delivered electronically and by courier to Julian Vance, Eleanor Vance, and the VCI board. Almost simultaneously, more cars began to pull up. Julian's sleek black sedan, Eleanor's silver SUV right behind it, and then Olivia Hayes in a ridiculously bright yellow sports car, no doubt a recent gift. Julian practically vaulted out of his car, already barking into his phone, his face a mask of thunder. Eleanor emerged more slowly, her expression tight with displeasure, likely annoyed by the unexpected tajammu of staff at the entrance. Olivia looked less ideally flustered, her usually perfect blonde hair slightly disheveled. They hadn't even reached the door when the real chaos began. Julian strode towards the entrance, waving a dismissive hand at the assembled staff, clearly intending to barge in. The Arthur property security guard stepped forward, calm but firm, holding up a laminated sheet of paper, a copy of the closure notice. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I saw Julian's face go from red to a sort of puce. He started yelling, jabbing a finger at the guard. Eleanor rushed to his side, her voice, even from across the street, carrying a shrill edge. Olivia just stood there, her jaw slack, looking utterly lost. Her phone, like everyone else's, was probably buzzing with the structural maintenance email at 9:30 a.m. I sent the press release to the pre-compiled list of local and national business journals and food industry publications within minutes. My laptop started pinging with alerts as the first headlines appeared online. Vance Culinary Institute abruptly shuttered amidst lease dispute. Ethical breaches cited as landlord evicts prestigious culinary school. Then I got out of my car. I debated this part, but Mr. Chin had advised it. A personal presence, he'd said, could prevent further escalation, or at least direct it appropriately. I walked calmly across the street, the binder of evidence tucked under my arm. Julian saw me first, his eyes, already bloodshot, widened, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. "You," he roared, his voice cracking. "Breonna Sterling, what is the meaning of this outrage?" Eleanor turned, her face a mask of disbelief. Olivia just stared, pale and shaken. "Julian, Eleanor, Olivia," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, carrying clearly over the rising hubbub. "Perhaps you didn't read your lease agreement with Arthur Properties quite as carefully as you should have." I opened the binder to a pre-marked tab. Section 9, Subclause B. It pertains to unethical corporate governance, wrongful dismissal demonstrably motivated by nepotism, and actions that bring the reputation of this property into disrepute. I looked directly at Julian. "I have rather extensive documentation, Julian. Emails detailing your instructions to HR to create a performance improvement plan for me after you'd already offered Olivia my expanded role. Memos praising Olivia's contributions to projects she barely touched. Witness statements regarding the deliberate spread of false rumors intended to defame me." I then turned to Eleanor. "And Eleanor, I have copies of your communications instructing staff to ignore or manage formal complaints about Olivia's conduct and professional competence." Finally, I met Olivia's wide, panicked eyes. Olivia, attempting to build a career on deceit and the work of others. It's not a sustainable recipe. Your fresh perspective seems to have involved a significant amount of plagiarism and a disregard for the very standards VCI claims to uphold. Olivia started to stammer, something about family, about misunderstanding. It might have been genuine tears welling in her eyes, or just very good acting. "Breonna, please, we can talk about this." "We are talking, Olivia," I said, my voice firm, not unkind. "The time for private discussion, however, passed when you chose to participate in a coordinated effort to unjustly remove me and undermine my professional standing. As per the notice you've all received, the Vance Culinary Institute has 24 hours to vacate these premises. Anything left behind after 9 a.m. tomorrow will be considered abandoned property." Julian was sputtering about lawyers, about lawsuits. Eleanor looked like she might faint. "Family is important, Olivia," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, echoing a sentiment she might have tried to use. "That's why I'm protecting mine. Arthur Properties is my grandfather's legacy, and its integrity, much like my own, is not for sale, nor is it to be carelessly compromised." I gave a small, final nod. Then I turned and walked back to my car, leaving them to the storm they had, in every sense, created. The main course had been served, and it was, as they say, best served cold. 6 months later, the landscape looks different. The Vance Culinary Institute, after a chaotic and very public scramble, eventually found a new, much smaller, and far less prestigious location in a suburban office park. Their enrollment, I hear, has plummeted. Julian and Eleanor Vance are no longer the darlings of the city's philanthropic scene. Their names are more often whispered in connection with that unfortunate business with Arthur Properties. Olivia Hayes, as far as anyone can tell, has vanished from the culinary world altogether. Last I heard, through the city grapevine, she was trying to launch some kind of lifestyle blog from her parents' guest house. The building at 700 Chestnut Street, however, is buzzing with a different kind of energy. Arthur Properties didn't release it to another culinary institute. Instead, I decided to do something Arthur himself would have approved of. We're in the final stages of renovating it into the Arthur Sterling Center for Culinary Heritage and Community Kitchens. It's a non-profit venture. Part of it will be a state-of-the-art teaching facility offering affordable vocational training for aspiring chefs from underserved communities. Another part will be a culinary incubator, providing subsidized kitchen space for local food entrepreneurs. And the heart of it will be a library and archive dedicated to preserving regional American culinary traditions, based on Arthur's own extensive collection of old cookbooks and my research. My new office overlooks the main teaching kitchen. It's bright, filled with the scent of good things baking, and the happy, focused chatter of students. There's a warmth here, a sense of shared purpose, of building something genuine that was always just out of reach at the VCI under Julian's leadership. The framed photo of my grandfather, Arthur, sits on my desk. His smile, that knowing, gentle strength, still feels like a guiding presence. Am I angry anymore, honestly? No. The anger burned itself out, leaving behind something cleaner, stronger, a sense of peace, perhaps, and a deep, quiet confidence in my own resilience in the foundations Arthur helped me build. The past doesn't haunt me. It taught me. It showed me what I was capable of, not just in a kitchen, but in the quiet, often underestimated, corridors of business and law. It taught me that true strength isn't about a title or a corner office. It's about integrity, preparation, and knowing, really knowing, the ground beneath your feet. And sometimes, it's about having the courage to wake a sleeping giant when justice demands it. That journey taught me that sometimes, the most powerful recipes aren't loud or flashy. They're built on patience, on ingredients gathered quietly over years, and on a deep understanding of your own fundamental values. Betrayal can leave a bitter taste, no doubt, but it can also be the catalyst for a rebirth that's far sweeter than you might have imagined. If you've ever tasted that bitterness, that feeling of being sidelined or undervalued after pouring your heart into something, I hope you'll share a bit of your story in the comments below. I genuinely read everyone, and knowing we're not alone in these quiet battles means a great deal. If my story resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own journey reflected here, perhaps consider subscribing for more. We all have these stories of unseen struggles and hard-won peace. And if you feel moved to support the channel, a small contribution through super thanks is always deeply appreciated. Sometimes, giving back, even in small ways, is part of our own healing too. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves.